Okay, welcome to today's lunchtime lecture. We're really pleased to see so many people here. And I'm really pleased to welcome our speaker today, Dr. Rachele De Felice. Rachele came to UCL in 2012, and she's in the English department. She's affiliated to the Survey of English Usage, which is a project located in the English department. And she's also affiliated to the UCL Centre for Digital Humanities. So Rachele works across groups of people and is a great collaborator, actually, as much of her work shows. Her research is in the field of corpus pragmatics, so she's interested in using large collections of real-world texts, that's the corpus part, to understand how people use language to achieve communicative and social goals, such as being polite to one another, issuing orders, or establishing friendly relations. And that's the pragmatics part, okay, meaning in context. She's particularly interested in applications of this to workplace communications. She's worked, for example, on the Enron bank of emails as well, so lots of work on business language, and has recently been focusing particularly on the Hillary Clinton emails. And that's what she's going to talk about today. So welcome, Rachele, and please tell us what's really going on in Hillary Clinton's emails.
Thank you, Catherine, for that introduction, and thank you all for spending your lunchtime hour with us, whether you're doing it here in person or in streaming. So as Catherine said, we're going to talk a bit about what's going on in Hillary Clinton's emails, and I will tell you something about that. But also in doing so, I hope to have the chance to give you some insights on what it's like to do research in linguistics and in corpus linguistics specifically, which, as Catherine said, is one of my areas of research, to give you a sense of how do we do it, what are the challenges that we encounter, how do we get data, what methods do we use, and so on. Before we go into the details of the research, though, a very, very short recap about what I'm actually talking about. So you might recall that there was some discussion of an email scandal to do with Hillary Clinton in recent years. To the best of my understanding, this is what happened. When Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State in the Obama administration, normally she would have been expected to acquire an official government email address, a bit like those of us at UCL have an UCL email address. She did not. She continued to use a private email address on a private server called clintonemail.com, addresses of the form hrod22, hrod17 at clintonemail.com. Furthermore, she did not get a government-issued laptop or desktop computer. She continued to use her own BlackBerry, and later on was also using an iPad. And this had a couple of fairly serious consequences. Because the communications, all emails either to Hillary Clinton or from Hillary Clinton, were not going through official government servers, the government was not able to archive them, as would be normal practice with any kind of government documents. And because they did not have control, the government did not have control of the servers, they were unable to verify that the servers were in fact secure enough and that no sensitive or crucial government information, political information, was being exposed to prying eyes or to other intrusions. When this came to light, the FBI was then compelled to launch an investigation in 2015 to assess whether, in fact, any such damage, any such intrusions had occurred, or if everything was okay. And this took a while. They received from the Clinton team, they received all the emails from this period, so that's 3 to 4 years worth of emails. And in 2016, the FBI concluded, having studied all this data, that although extreme carelessness had occurred, no charges would be filed against Clinton and her team. As a corollary of this event, once this information, once these documents were in the government's hands, they were then open to Freedom of Information Act requests. It was possible for citizen groups and other pressure groups to issue Freedom of Information Act requests to have the documents put in the public domain. And this is exactly what happened to this data. And from June 2015, the FBI started releasing folders of PDFs of these emails on their official FBI Freedom of Information Act website. There's over 33,000 emails at the moment, and they're still releasing a few now and then. So it's very important to stress at this point that when I'm talking about this data, I'm talking about legitimately obtained data. This is official government-issued, government-sanctioned emails, nothing from hacked emails, nothing from leaked emails or anything else like that. Now, when this happened, there were lots of different reactions, obviously, but there was also a lot of interest in what is in these emails from lots of different parties. And if you think about your first thoughts when I say, oh, look, here's a giant collection of all these emails from a workplace or from your university or from your institution, you probably have some ideas about what those emails will be like. Maybe some preconceptions about what kind of things you will expect to find in those messages. You might or might not have expected to find an email like this. So this is an email exchange between Hillary Clinton and a woman called Capricia Marshall, who is a high-ranking official in the Office of Protocol of the US government at this point. So the email below is from Hillary Clinton, and the one on top is Capricia's response. And I can see from your faces that you're starting to read your way through the emails. The main point of Hillary Clinton's email to Capricia Marshall is to say, when we were in a meeting with the president and some other people, there was a really cool carpet on the floor. Do you have any photos? I really want to get another look at that carpet. This is actually one of my favorite emails in the collection altogether. But is this what you thought you would see when I said workplace government emails? Possibly not, depending where you work, obviously. So this is why, indirectly, this is why this data collection is so interesting and so exciting for us as researchers, because we have ideas of what workplace communication is like. But until we have 33,000 data points, 33,000 examples of actual communication in a workplace, we can't be sure that our expectations and that our preconceptions are correct. We can't really back them up or verify them. So when this came along, lots of different types of researchers got very excited for different reasons. People who are interested in sociology and in organization management suddenly had a big example set of how people run a big workplace. People who are interested in contemporary, recent history, political events, have this big data set of how people who were directly involved in a lot of important recent historical events were talking about those events while they were happening. Really, really invaluable opportunity. People who are interested in library science and archival management now have lots of interesting questions to ask about how do you deal with an email collection? What do you keep and how do you save the relevant bits of information? And linguists like me have tons of questions we can ask about this data, about how people interact with each other, how people use language to achieve their goals, to manage their interpersonal relationships. And thank you, Catherine, for giving such a clear outline of the kinds of things I'm interested in. So the questions, or some of the questions I want to look at today with you are as follows. In this particular setup, in this institution, are people using the same kind of politeness to those who are more and less senior than them? And if you are in Clinton's inner circle, and we'll get back to that in a minute, what happens there? Is it somehow different? What kind of boss, what kind of leader or manager is Hillary Clinton? Does she use what we think of as conventional politeness? And these are interesting questions, not just because we're nosy or we're curious and we have this opportunity, but because it helps us answer these bigger pieces of the puzzle. How do people manage their relationships through words? How do people achieve their goals through the use of language? And we have a great empirical collection of data to help us get at that question. So how do we do it? How do we answer the question? So as Catherine said, I work in Corpus Linguistics. There's lots to say about Corpus Linguistics. All I will say here is that we like to use a variety of tools to identify patterns in large amounts of data. And once we find these patterns, we then apply our knowledge and our analytical skills to work out what is special about the patterns, what they're telling us about the context we're studying. And we'll see some examples of that soon. But we also need some manual work. There are aspects of this topic that just require good old-fashioned manual labor. And in particular, in this case, when it comes to understanding the power of this social network. It's a really interesting aspect of this data, because often when we collect data in corpus linguistics, we have some information about who produced it. Is it a man? Is it a woman? Is it a teenager? Are they old? Are they young? What is their level of education? But it all gets anonymized for privacy reasons. Because these are official documents from the government, mostly involving official government employees who everyone knew were working there at the time, we don't have this anonymity here. We have the names of the vast majority of the people involved in these email exchanges. And by looking at the names, we discovered that it's lots of different people who are involved in the emails. And remember I said, these are all the emails that go through Clinton's personal server, so sent to her or written by her. In fact, she herself only wrote about a quarter of them. The rest are authored from a large range of people with lots of different roles. So we have people obviously who work at the US State Department, other people who work in other parts of the White House. Because this is the State Department, they have a lot of dealings with representatives of foreign governments, but also non-political individuals, people who are associated with the Clinton Foundation, and people who have no kind of particular institutional affiliation at all. And then we have another layer of interest. I did not make this up. This is a real thing. Hillaryland is real. It is a self-defined label of people, mostly women, who have been associated with or working with Hillary Clinton for a very long time, in some cases for decades. And at some point, one of them decided that this is what they should be called. And Hillaryland is sort of a proxy for Clinton's inner circle. And that's why it's so interesting to see here. We now are looking not just at a network where people have different professional roles, but also where people have another way of connecting more closely or more loosely with, let's say, the center of the network, which is Hillary Clinton herself. So we can ask more questions about how people interact with each other. So not expecting you to go through this, but again, to show you an advantage of using this data set where so much of it is public knowledge. This is an organizational chart of the State Department from the time that Clinton was Secretary of State. And I should say that I didn't find it, my array found it, so yay him. Once we had this, and once we had all the names of the people involved in the emails, we could then go and check what their job title was at the time, so we would know where to place them on this chart. So when we were then looking at emails between various individuals, depending on the chart, we would be able to say, this is an email that's traveling upwards along the workplace hierarchy or downwards along the workplace hierarchy. So very valuable information. Armed with all this information, we can finally get back to our original questions. And to try to answer these questions, we collected from the big data set of 33,000 emails, 500, just to test out some ideas, which covered a range of different interactions with people in different roles, different levels of seniority, and different positions in the inner and outer circle to see how things would go. Now let's have a little interaction again. Here is a two email sequence. At the bottom is an email from Michael Fuchs, who at the time was Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, so more junior than Hillary Clinton. He is writing to Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is replying at the top. So if you just take a moment to look at these two emails and think about whether they look the same to you, whether there's any striking differences, any other kinds of things that come to mind. And perhaps we can sort of do by nodding or shaking of head. If you think that the emails are roughly the same, nod or shake heads. One is much more polite than the other. Yeah? Is the one from Clinton weird though? Would you feel put out if you got that kind of email from your boss, or would you just think it's part of the course? Okay, good range of shaking and nodding. Thank you. So I would agree with you in the main that there are some differences, especially in the tone of the two emails, but if I received the first one, I wouldn't feel particularly aggrieved. So that was just our impression based on one email. Let's see what happens when we collect lots of data points. So having divided our 500 emails into those that were traveling upwards along a hierarchy and downwards, we then went to the next step of typical corpus linguistics research of extracting all the two-word phrases, all the two-word sequences in all these emails and seeing which ones were the most frequent. And you find that the most frequent ones, this is obviously just a sample, but these are the top ones for frequency in each group, are very, very different. In fact, there's basically no overlap between the two. So then we have to ask ourselves, what does this mean? We have to look at these phrases in context, in their bigger patterns of use, to see what they're actually doing. And there's different functions that you can extract in this way. The first is not particularly interesting. So one of the biggest functions of emails that go up the hierarchy are for Clinton's PA to send her schedule for the next day, which is just lines of information. 6 a.m., secretary's office. 9 a.m., en route to White House. 3 p.m., secretary's office, meeting with such and such. Quite boring, quite tiring, not particularly interesting. Accounts for those first few phrases. Another big functions of emails traveling up is thanking. There's a lot of thanking that people do. Thanking for someone for their time and their efforts and their response and so on. Quite a nice show of respect. And then there's my favorite, I think, of these, which is the sending of information, where the information is reassuring the people higher up that you are busy and that you are doing what you've been asked to do, and you are working very hard. You're putting together plans, and you're doing points, and you're working on this, and you will give updates. So it's very focused on, I know I have a job to do, don't worry, I'm doing it. Or just information, sending information. Now compare this with what happens on the other side. The people higher up the hierarchy, perhaps unsurprisingly, are the ones that have the right to ask for things and to direct things. And some of these are typical office tasks. Can you schedule time for me? Do you have any information for me? Asking for information, find out, check. And also the very interesting we. We need to do something in writing. And many of you can probably appreciate the interesting use of this we, this collective we, if you receive this kind of message from someone higher up than you in your workplace or institution. It doesn't mean we are going to do it, it means you are going to do it, right? So it's just a nice way. But what's interesting is that it's quite a polite and respectful way of saying, do this for me. So going back to one of our questions, is Clinton, are the other senior people in this group polite or impolite? Well, they're not. They're not being too aggressive. They're not being too demanding. They're using typical ways of asking people to do things. So it's really nothing out of the ordinary here. There's also a lot of consultation going on here. A lot of wanting to call, wanting to talk, to discuss things, asking other people for their input on the basis of their experience. And this is also an interesting trait of this particular workplace. There seems to be a lot of emphasis on face-to-face discussion and relying on people's areas of expertise. And we'll come back to this discussion in a moment. So now we have another two pair of emails, and now we're thinking about the inner-outer circle distinction. The emails in blue are between Hillary Clinton and Cheryl Mills. Cheryl Mills is a member of Hillary Land. She is also the chief counselor and chief of staff of the State Department, very much in the inner circle. In beige, orange, whatever this color is an email exchange with Jacob Liu, who at this point is very high up in the office for the budget, but is not in the inner circle. And again, if you could take a moment to look at the two pairs of emails and think about any differences between them. Does one pair remind you more of a text message conversation than the other? Is it the blue one? Good. Does one pair look more like a very formal exchange of information kind of thing? Is it this colored one? Yes. So you can see that, again, obviously being in the inner circle really changes the way things are done. You can get away with briefer messages, not the sort of more complex sentence structure of the outer circle one, more personal information, and you wouldn't necessarily need people in the outer circle to know where you are at what time of the day or what time you get home, and more exchange of facts in this one, and more exchange of evaluative comments in the other one, and subjective information. So this is what we get from a comparison of 1 or 2 emails, and again, what does the data say? So we did the same kind of thing. We divided the emails in these different batches. We looked at all the 2-word sequences in them. And again, the most frequent ones were quite different in the 3 groups. What are they doing? What are the differences in function? So I just said earlier that there's a lot of talking and consulting and discussing that goes on in this workplace. And this is particularly what happens in the inner circle. If you're in the inner circle, you have face-to-face time. You talk, you call on the phone, you discuss in person, you arrange phone calls and other face-to-face meetings. So that's where all the consulting and thinking takes place. Another interesting trend of this inner circle, again linked up to this consultation, is this use of the phrase, "let me know." If you think about your own experiences of email, you often end an email or see emails that finish with the line, "let me know what else I can do," or "let me know if you have any more questions." And it's this thing that you just have to put there because that's what you do. It's part of the formula of writing a business email, but it doesn't really mean anything. In this data set, when someone says, "let me know," they really mean it. They mean, let me know what I should do. Let me know what you hear today. Let me know as soon as you have updates. So that was an interesting distinction I found, one of the more striking distinctions I found based with my previous studies on workplace emails, that in this case, "let me know" is a real question, it's a real directive. It's not just something you say because you have to. The outer circle, when the inner circle writes to the outer circle, it's either, again, to exchange practicalities and information, like we saw in the previous example emails, or to exchange formalities. Lots of this thanking again, lots of good wishes for a happy new year, happy Thanksgiving, all the best to you and your family, and so on. So it's a different level of interaction going on here compared to the consultations of the inner circle. And perhaps unsurprisingly, when the outer circle is writing in, it's not that different from when the people lower down the workplace hierarchy are writing up, because if you are lower down the hierarchy, you're probably also not in the inner circle. So you're again engaging in that busy work and that activity work to say, we are working, we will provide you with recommendations, or we can update you and tell you something tomorrow. So this is a different kind of we from the "we need to" that we saw in the previous slides. So to go back to our initial questions, what is going on in this workplace? The State Department, based on our data, does look to be a hierarchical organization, but the language reflects this not in form, but in content. So what do I mean by this? We did not find massive differences between the ways people speak to each other, depending on where they are in the hierarchy, in the choice of words. So I mentioned the "we need to" before. Another thing that we looked at to check some of these intuitions is whether there are other forms of very strong directing verbs, like "you must" or "you have to do this." And the only instance I found so far of "you must" is actually to say, you must be very proud of yourself. You did a really good job today. So it's really quite a nice compliment. It's not that kind of order at all. So when I say it reflects it in content, it means that different people in different places of the organization have different rights about what they can write about or what they can ask for or what they can say they've been doing. And people who are closer to each other might be entitled to express more personal information, to maybe express more personal opinions. Sometimes you get messages such as, you looked very good in that interview, or you looked a bit tired in the TV interview, so a more personal kind of comment. But you don't get very, very strong differences. The only formal difference we might find is related perhaps to the use of the BlackBerry. So you might have spotted in some of the earlier examples, there's a lot of please written as PLS and some thank you written as THX. And some people might think, actually, that's a bit rude. Why are you not even making the effort to write out these words in full? Isn't that disrespectful? Shouldn't you know better? But actually, I think if we recall what BlackBerries were like 10 or 9 years ago, they were very annoying to write on. And so anything you could do to shorten your typing was probably fair game. So I wouldn't put too much emphasis on that difference. What happens when you're in the inner circle? Well, I think the main thing that happens if you're in the inner circle is that you get a lot more phone calls, because people in the inner circles are the ones that are called up or are scheduling calls or are coming to talk or are coming to discuss. Less superficially, we can also then think, well, okay, it looks like at the US State Department, the really serious topics, the really high stakes events are discussed face-to-face, are managed face-to-face. They're not just managed over email or over a BlackBerry message. And you might find that comforting, that's how this business of government is taking place. In general, as I said, politeness in this workplace did not strike me as being particularly different from other findings in previous research, either my own previous research or those of others, especially as reported about face-to-face communication. But there is still a lot to look at and a lot to answer. A couple of potentially very interesting lines of inquiry that we're following up at the moment regard, one is, how do you deal with when something goes wrong? How do you deal with conflict and with problems? Whether you are the cause of the conflict and you have to own up to what you've done, or whether you just have to report that something has gone wrong along the way, but you're still the bearer of these bad news, and how do other people react? Because I think that there are interesting lessons to be learned from that kind of interaction, and to see, do people get criticized? Do they get criticized in writing? Or is that also something that only happens face-to-face communication? Another possible very interesting line of inquiry, again related to how people talk about what's happening, is how do people report events? We talked at the beginning about how we have this commentary on political events and social events, and we can see what happened at the time in that point in history and how people were writing about it at the same time, and to see whether there's any interesting differences or different ways of representing particular factual events. So this is all ongoing. This is by no means a completed project. I should finish with some thanks before opening the floor for questions. Like a lot of academic research, this is not an individual endeavor. It's very much a group project. My main collaborator is at Uppsala University, Dr. Gregory Garretson. I've benefited from the support of the UCL Global Engagement Funds, which allows me to get the assistance of my RA, John Paolo Manalassis, who's over there. And some initial findings from this work have already been published in this open access article. So if you want to find out more, you can read it regardless of your affiliation. And I look forward to hearing what you have to ask me, if anything.
Hear me?
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much, Rachele, for a really fascinating piece of such interesting from so many perspectives, this talk. We need to use the microphone when we ask questions. See what I did there? And it's around. So I'd like to open the floor now for any questions or comments. Thank you.
Hi, that was a great lecture and a great insight into how government works. I speak as somebody, I'm John McTernan. I used to work as Director of Communications for Julia Gillard, and I've got my own corpus of emails that was leaked about how I was a communications manager. One of the things I was going to say, do you consider the inner circle thing, which is you've got these emails because of FOI. That's one of the reasons why inner circle people do phone calls and face-to-face, because there's no record left. And that's a key way of managing government in the context of freedom of information, which in my experience was always called freedom from information when I was working.
That's a really good point, and it's actually illustrates one of the tensions that I haven't quite worked out, because if you decide to use your own server for whatever reason, maybe you think, okay, these emails are not going to end up where they normally end up. But then, as you say, if you move so much communication offline and into face-to-face, at the back of your mind, you still think, oh, maybe they can end up somewhere. So it is a really interesting question of what are the thought processes there and the decision-making trees. And I would love to have access to that kind of sort of sequence of events. Thank you.
In the middle.
This is a very simple question which doesn't really relate to your research at all, but I wonder how on earth such a situation could have arisen, whereby Hillary Clinton was allowed to carry on for perhaps years and years without anybody in official position saying, this isn't the way that government's supposed to operate.
I share some of your perplexity. I have spent a long time reading through various media articles, explanations, government website explanations. It's kind of part of that decision-making process that I haven't quite worked out. I think part of the confusion arises because before Hillary Clinton's role as Secretary of State, email was still not very much used in the government and in the White House. So perhaps the protocols were still a bit fuzzy. There's some evidence that Colin Powell did use email a little bit and did have a BlackBerry, but not very much. So maybe the way things were arranged was still a bit in flux at this point, and that allowed some things to fall through the gaps. But I would not wish to speculate further. Probably memos. The memo is a very, very powerful, the typed memo is a big thing in government, I gather. They still exchange a lot of memos. A lot of the emails are also just, here is the memo I prepared for you. And then Clinton will send it to someone else and say, please print this out so I can read it, because she can't read it on a BlackBerry. So I think the memo is still very much there as an item.
Thank you for your lecture. I was just curious to know, did you find any examples of memes, so turns of phrases, and was there any difference in the dynamic, whether the inner circle was coining them and they were being picked up by the outer circle, or whether the outer circle was using them and the inner circle began to suddenly use them?
That's an interesting question. You mean sort of just ways of framing a particular event? Not obviously, in the sense that in the frequency list of phrases that we found, nothing of that sort obviously jumped out. but it's possible that one of the things we want to do is to start relating clusters of emails more closely to particular events, political events, geographic events, such as the earthquake in Haiti comes up quite prominently. So it's possible that once you start grouping emails in that way, that will allow that kind of phraseology to bubble up. So yeah, thanks for that.
Down at the front, in the middle here.
Hello, thank you. That was really interesting. You mentioned earlier that Hilary had a PA, and I was wondering, in the first instance, is that someone who was in the inner circle? And then did you ever get the impression that emails were ever drafted on Hilary's behalf? Was there any kind of inconsistency between ones that were definitely sent by her and ones where he felt someone else probably wrote that for her?
Both very good questions, thank you. So I think at various points she had more than one PA, actually, right? And sometimes concurrently. And we put the PAs in the outer circle because we were mostly using the Hilaryland membership as a proxy for inner circle. Hilaryland has its own Wikipedia page, so you can check membership there. That's where we learned many things. So I would not put her in the inner circle, but I can see why you would, depending on what the criteria used are, that might make sense. In terms of drafting the emails, I've been thinking about this a lot. Most of the emails are very distinctive. They're like those very 1 or 2 line things that we saw in the blue email exchange with Cheryl Mills. And they're on a BlackBerry. And it's quite hard to get someone else to write an email for you and then send it from your BlackBerry. And later on, when the iPad appears, we also get some longer emails. And there are some that are stylistically a bit different. So they're a lot longer. They have things like, "Dear Mr. Such and Such," then a big paragraph of text, "with best regards" or "kind regards, Hillary Clinton." So that's a bit different. And we're not sure if it's different just because the identity of the recipient called for a different way of writing an email, or if once we get to the iPad stage, it also becomes easier for someone else to draft emails. So I would have to work with some colleagues in forensic linguistics and authorship attribution to see whether there's actually any linguistic differences that suggest that they're being drafted.
Another question, in the middle there.
Hello, thank you very much. I was just wondering how you sort of picked the 500 emails out of the 33,000, and also sort of, have you read all of them?
No, I have not read all of them at all. I think that would be, it might happen eventually. It sort of was at random in the sense that we knew we wanted 500 and we knew we wanted this balance of these different characteristics. Because we originally also wanted to look at differences in gender, although that's very hard because there's so many women in this data set and so few men. It's hard to get a balanced exchange. But then it was just a case of looking at a batch, finding a random subset of this batch that fulfilled our criteria, putting it in the 500 pot and moving on to a new subset. But eventually we will have proper analysis of all 33,000.
I think we've got time for 2 more if they're short, so one at the front here and then we'll go to the back.
Thank you. Comparisons are often interesting. Have you had the chance to compare the style of correspondence of this administration or that administration with previous ones, or indeed subsequent ones?
Thank you for asking this question, because it's actually lets me make an interesting point about how we do corpus linguistics and what we can say about this. Because at the moment, I've told you a lot of things about this administration, the Clinton administration, as it were, and how Clinton speaks, writes as a secretary, and how her colleagues write. We don't know, of course, whether this is the behavior of any Secretary of State, any senior politician, or this particular set of people, because I haven't compared it to anything. And as I said before, unfortunately, before her tenure as Secretary of State, they didn't really use emails very much. So I don't have a good set of, a comparable large email data set of, say, a senior male political figure with whom to compare this, a legally obtained data set. With the current administration, you never know, right? It's still in theory, but if another legal source of data comes up, then of course it would be very interesting. One possible more sensible comparison would be with the Enron emails, which Catherine mentioned in her kind introduction. The Enron emails, the emails from the Enron Corporation are publicly available because of legal proceedings following the company's collapse. There are some very senior male figures in Enron. You could look at them, but that's a slightly different time period, a different environment. So it's a very imprecise art, and it's very frustrating. And I would like more people to have their emails made public, please.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more quick one up the back there, please.
Hi, I'm curious as a computer scientist what role computational linguistics or computational modeling plays in your research, if any.
Down the line, the plan is to do more natural language processing tasks on this data, including named entity recognition, so automatically finding all the proper names of places and people and institutions. So you can then do a more targeted search and say, I want all the emails that talk about Washington or all the emails that talk about the World Bank. I have some work going on automatic speech act identification using NLP, so automatically working out if a particular line is a request or a promise, an apology, and so on. And perhaps some network analysis down the line as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, can I ask you all to join us to thank our speaker for a really stimulating